Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, episode 400, all at once.
Welcome to A Canadian Investing in the U.S., a podcast and YouTube channel focused on Canadians buying real estate with host Glen Sutherland.
Welcome to a new episode of A Canadian Investing in the U.S. with Glen Sutherland. This week, my guest is myself, Glen Sutherland, and this is episode 400. So I wanted to do something special. Like just every once in a while, I like to do an episode with myself. So this week, I wanted to talk about how I bought my first U.S. property. I think it might be some value in here for everybody. I want to go through this in kind of a story. I want to talk about all the mistakes I made, and hopefully there's something you can pull out of it. If you're like listening to this and you have some questions, do reach out to me. I do have a free booking link. There's one on my website. There's also glensutherland.com/consult if you want to book a free call with me just to go over some stuff. But anyway, I'm going to get into the story and we'll go from there. So how did this story sort of work? So this is back in probably 2015, 2016. And I was running a whole business in Canada. So I was buying in Kitchener, I was buying in Cambridge, and I was buying mostly semi-detached properties. So that's like in the US, it'd be a duplex, but half of it, like a side by side. So I was buying those. I bought a couple of row houses as well. But honestly, I was having trouble scaling in this whole process. What was happening as I grew is that lenders, like the big five banks in Canada, were not allowing me to get any more properties. So in order to do another one, I had to sell one and then buy one. And what I was starting to get into this problem was that the affordability of buying these properties was just kept going up. It just kept getting more and more expensive. And as the properties kept getting more expensive, like just for an example, we would buy the first one for like 190,000 Canadian, and then when I went to buy like the sixth one, it was like the same property on the same road, but we're now talking like $300,000 for the same property. And mentally, I was having trouble spending that much more for the same property, but I did understand that when I sold it, I was making more money as well. But at the time, there wasn't much Canadian content for podcasts. Like my podcast didn't exist. I hadn't even thought about making a podcast at that point. Um, but anyway, I was sitting there and I was having trouble figuring this out. I was also stuck at the landlord tenant board all the time. I think everybody has strengths and everyone has weaknesses. And one of my weaknesses was screening tenants. So I've got that down to a science now, but honestly, the science is to outsource it to someone who's specializes in that. So back then, I was listening to a lot of So like I was saying, back then I was listening to a lot of podcasts. It was all American content, and the more I listened to it, I figured, hey, I think I can do this. I don't know what I don't know. I honestly don't know. I think I know everything because I've been doing all these rental properties and I like to consider slow flips in Ontario. I was buying in a couple different markets, Kitchener, Cambridge, and Strathroy, which is the other side of London. And I felt like I knew what I was doing. I felt like I could go do this in the US. It's completely different, but I figured, hey, I'll just go and do it myself. So I went down there. I was listening to podcasts. I got some contacts from there, and I ended up buying a turnkey property in Huntsville, Alabama. Was the very first property. I didn't understand lending. I didn't understand valuations. I didn't understand a lot of things. I never worked with a property manager before. I'd always self-managed all my properties in Canada. There was a lot of things, which I'm going to continue as I go through the story, tell you a lot of the different things that I just had no idea anything about. Um, so to purchase this property, I bought it from a turnkey provider because I figured, hey, this will give me some of the answers. I don't have all the answers, but this way it can fill in some of the gaps and make it a little bit less of a jump. So to purchase this property in the United States, I used my home equity line of credit from my home residence in Ontario to buy the property. This works because hey, I could get the amount of money I needed to purchase this property. Like I said, I didn't understand lending, so I was going to buy the whole property cash. In order to buy a property in the United States was going to cost me like 80 or 100 grand to buy a similar property as I was buying for, or actually, they're bigger, nicer properties that I was buying for 80 or 100 grand in Huntsville compared to at that time what I was buying for $300,000 in Ontario. And just to give you some quick math, like if you're buying a $300,000 house in Ontario, you're gonna put like 20% down, so you're coming up with like $60,000. Down in the US, I was buying, $80,000 house, but I didn't have leverage, but I was gonna figure that part out. Even if I was going to buy the property with my home equity line of credit in Canada, in the United States, or use that money in the United States, and say I didn't figure out how to put a mortgage on, I had the home equity line of credit on the property, and the property would cash flow substantially better than the property I had in Ontario, or the other, six or so properties I had at that time in Ontario. So I talked to a turnkey operator. I looked at their numbers. I trusted every number on the sheet. That's a big red flag, but you should know how to run all of your numbers on the sheet. The biggest mistake that Canadians make is over trusting. You have to remember the people that are selling you the property, their intent is to make money, right? And their intent is to sell a property for the highest value that they can get for a property. The other thing I should add about using a line of credit to buy in the US, it does complicate things, right? There's the part of transferring the money, and I know that there's ways of transferring this very efficiently with certain banks and doing certain things, but it does complicate things, and it's something that you should be thinking about. In my course, I do a whole section on how to use a line of credit properly, how to set this up properly, and how to make it work properly for your taxes. And taxes are one of the things that you're not thinking about because you're like, I want to write everything off, and you have to do this the right way. Um, And like I said, the other thing I did was I bought this sight unseen. So I purchased the property. After closing on the property, doing a remote closing, I traveled down to Huntsville, Alabama to view the property. And honestly, I was a little shocked to see what the standard of the property was. Whenever I bought properties in Canada for rentals and to compare it to the US for rentals, the quality was not the same. And I'd listened to podcasts and I understood that like there's rent ready renovations and there's flip ready renovations. But until you go down there and you see it, I was like, wow, this is rougher than I thought it would be, but it is totally livable. One of the perks of using the turnkey operator was it did come with property management already set up. As it turned out, I was using a property manager that was a national company. It didn't work out. Every time there was an issue with the property, and it was accounting issues. Like were making mistakes all the time. And what would happen is I would log in to the portal and it would say make a call if you had a dispute. And I would have to call in and then I'd have to talk to a person, another person, another person, another person, and they get directed to accounting. And anyway, it was like an hour to actually talk to a person. It felt like I was calling like a cell phone provider in Canada. I was like, it was driving me nuts. So that's some of the disadvantages of big property managers because it's just so big that you're kind of a small fish in the big pond. But anyway, I did that for a while. It wasn't for me. I ended up having to fire the property manager and finding a local company that would do a good job. I now work with two different property managers in that city, and that's part of scaling. Even on that first project, I made a lot of mistakes. Just buying turnkey, you can do better, but I understand that it puts stuff together. This is going to sound very like, Glenn pushing his own stuff, but this is not what I'm trying to do. But if I would have hired a coach, which at the time there wasn't a lot of coaches down there, the worry is now is that there's like everybody who's ever bought a single property down there has a coaching program, and most of them don't know what they're doing. But I would have hired a coach. I would have hired someone with experience and someone who understood how to deal with everything. Someone had to deal with people who understood how to do wire audits, people who knew how to get rid of liens, people who knew how to do civil suits, people who knew how to do. Make sure you get a good coach. Don't get someone who just bought a couple properties and is a brand new rookie. Anyway, um, so some of the mistakes I made. Um, Unreliable information from turnkey providers. You have to do your own due diligence. You have to understand how to do these things. You have to understand all of the availability of information in the United States, and it's not like Canada. In Canada, you buy blind a lot of the times because it's not as much public information. And this stuff is available in the United States for you to get a hold of. It's easy to understand what's going on all around you. There's so much more information. Another mistake I had was not understanding mortgages. It's one of those things when I think back, though, if I said, hey, if I was going to start over again, based on what I know now or based on what I knew then, based on what I knew then, it was the right move to go and to do this blindly. Because if I waited until I understood mortgages and I waited until I understood this and I waited until I understood that and I waited until all these lights were green, I wouldn't have taken action for 2 years. I would have missed out on a lot of stuff. I would have missed out on growing my business. I would have missed out on starting this podcast. I would have missed out on so much stuff. Like taking action is such a big part of this. And just doing something, getting that first property was huge, right? It created momentum. It turned into the two properties in Kansas City that I bought 6 months later and refinanced. It turned into the Indianapolis. It turned into the Ohio. It turned into everything, but it wouldn't have happened if I didn't take that first one, right? Without knowing 100%. The other mistake I made was my first wire. Oh, I sent money down there. Money came back anyway, I paid way too much in fees. Substantially way too much in fees. And there is so much better ways to send money down to the United States than dealing with all of that. So I would not want to do it that way again. But based on what I know now, if I was going to do this again, would I do it that way? Well, obviously, absolutely not. I would hire a coach. I should have hired the one coach I knew about that existed back then. Now there's lots of coaches. But if I would have hired a coach, I could have skipped that step. I could have bought a property that I could create value and add value to instantly. It would have gave me options for refinance. It would have given me options just to start with even a BRRRR, right? When you buy a property that's worth what it's worth, right? So if it's $100,000 property and you buy it for $100,000, you just have less exit strategies. But the counter side to this is like we're in a down market right now. So you will get, at least in theory, you should be getting bailed out of this with time, right? Time should fix issues, right? And that's what had made a lot of investors very wealthy in Ontario was just time, right? Appreciation. So anyway, would I do this again right now the same way that I did it back then? No. I would have started with some creative stuff. It wasn't till like property 5 that I started looking at buying from the bank, getting good at that. There's so many opportunities down there. And if you just think you're going to skip, and I'm going to save a little bit of money on this coaching, which is not a lot of money when you're talking about buying real estate. If I would have spent the money, I could have saved myself more money than that. Like even in my course, if you have an intention of getting a visa, it saves you more money than what the course costs by just taking the course and getting help with the visa, for instance, right? But by knowing what I didn't know, which is the obvious thing, like you don't know what you don't know, but by knowing what I know now, I could have bought properties that I could have done perfect BRRRRs on right from the start. There was great opportunity around there. I just didn't even know it. And I wasted like my first 2 years in there at growing at a snail speed when I could have grown at a massive speed. The opportunities there's so much more available to buy in the United States. So if you are interested in buying in the US, reach out to me. Like, let's just do a free call. I said the email or my calendar link. I said my calendar link at the start of the show, glensutherland.com/consult, 1N in Glen. And let's just do a call. But there's so much opportunity down there. If you have questions, send me an email, send me a text, book a call. I'd love to help you achieve your goals and scale this into a real business. Thanks, everybody.
That was a nice video. Bye.